Almost all of us have heard the wind howling through the trees, or blowing against our windows on a cold winter night. But wind can lend a distinct atmosphere to almost any environment, and even help certain experiences to stand out in our minds. Here are 4 stories where the movement of air became the maker of fear. Real quick though, I know this channel has some pretty random videos. Therefore, if you do consider subscribing, consider leaving notifications on personalized or turning them off altogether. Either way, let's get to listening. Story 1. This story takes place when I was around 8 or 9. My dad was the manager at a local warehouse that stored refrigerated items. I forgot what all they had, but I do remember that there were several large refrigerated areas with pallets stacked multiple levels high. Sometimes in the summer he'd take me there while he did his work, and I vividly remember us playing hide and seek in those refrigerated areas by running around the pallets. There was one slightly terrifying experience though, or at least it seemed surreal. On this one particular trip to the warehouse, things started off as usual. My dad and I went to the office area and I started playing Windows games on one of the computers. As this was a weekend day, there wasn't as much to do, and after about 2 hours he had finished his work. We'd usually play hide and seek right before leaving, and so we made our way to the section of the building with the large refrigerated rooms. While my dad slowly counted to 10, I ran into one of the rooms. The cold air hit me as I moved through the plastic flaps, and the droning from the overhead fans got a lot louder. I started looking for an area towards the back of the room that was mostly closed off but still had at least one exit. I think I was almost to the back corner when I stopped dead in my tracks, initially confused. There, facing me, was a man in a large parka, pants and boots, and wearing sunglasses. He was standing completely still and didn't make any sound. I'm pretty sure I knew it wasn't my dad, but I thought it was one of the other employees that worked there. I wasn't sure what to do, so I started walking away. Soon I heard the plastic flaps of the entrance to the room open as my dad walked inside. He found me relatively quickly and we both started laughing. I told him about the man I saw while we were still in the room, and, also figuring it was someone who worked there, he started walking with me back to that location. When that area came into view, the man was no longer there. I'm not sure if my dad was creeped out at that point, but I remember we walked around for several minutes before finally heading back out. It felt nice to walk back into the warmer hallway, and we looked around for the man but didn't see him. That's when we walked back up to the office section of the building, and my dad checked in with the other 2 people who were working there that day. They both said it wasn't them, and from what I could tell, my dad believed them. I think that's when he really started to worry that someone had snuck into the warehouse, either to steal items or for some other purpose. He and one of the men went to a little room upstairs and started to review the surveillance footage, and what they found was shocking. No later than 10 seconds after my dad went into the refrigerated room after me, the man walked out through the flaps, with the sound of the fans apparently muffling whatever noise he made. The man then walked quickly through the hallway leading directly outside. From one of the outside cameras, we saw him continue to walk across the parking lot, scale the fence, and disappear somewhere into the office park that bordered the warehouse. But the even weirder part was that the man had entered the warehouse over 3 hours earlier, before my dad and I had even arrived. He snuck in the same way he snuck out, too. I think my dad called the cops and someone else from the company, because about 15 minutes later the cops showed up and he was on the phone with someone for a good while. As far as I know, they never caught whoever did it. Thinking back, it seems like such a strange memory. I was literally standing 20 feet from a complete stranger who had snuck into the building, thinking it was one of my dad's coworkers. Only then did I realize it was a stranger. Nothing was stolen, but who knows what that man's intentions were, or what he would have done if he hadn't made a hasty escape. Also, why did he just wait inside that room for 3 hours? While not overly frightening, I still think about that encounter from time to time, and it's still a weird mix of nostalgia and uneasiness. Story 2. I live close to a forest preserve with a few really nice trails, and one Thursday afternoon I found myself with a few hours of time, so I decided to head out. I remember this particular day was rather windy, and though it might not make sense now, I think that almost led to me being kidnapped. I don't consider myself a serious hiker, and I'd only ever take a water bottle and some snacks with me. I got in my car and drove the short distance to one of the parking lots, where I got out and started walking. The lot was pretty small. I think there were only about 10 or so spaces, and I happened to be the only one parked there at the moment. It didn't surprise me, since it was a weekday afternoon after all. At this particular location, there was one of those wooden information boards that had a map, some bulletins, and some information about the local wildlife. I looked at it for a few moments, before my eyes were caught by the sight of the wind billowing through the grass field where the main trail started. The sky was overcast, but it was still a little warm out, and I just loved the atmosphere. The particular trail I was following went through the grass field before going into a woodsy area. Then it went up a small hill. Then it went down another side of the hill and eventually looped back. I think it was only like 2 or 3 miles, and aside from the hill part, it was mostly flat. After walking for about 10 minutes, I was almost to the woodsy area, but then I stopped when I thought I heard something. Above the gusts of wind, I could hear a distinct, high-pitched metallic tinkling sound. I realized it was a wind chime, and out of curiosity, I decided to see if I could find where it was. It seemed to be coming from the woodsy area, but not on the main trail. I walked another 100 feet or so, and the sound from the chimes sounded like it was directly to my right. I walked a bit further and found a smaller trail branching in that direction. I hadn't taken it before, and couldn't remember if it was on the main map. Anyway, I decided to follow it, and as I walked, the tinkling got louder. But after a couple minutes, I thought I began to hear another similar sound, this time farther away again and to the left. I was confused. Why would someone hang 2 wind chimes at random locations in a forest? Initially I thought it was maybe someone meditating or trying to relax, which I did occasionally see on the trails from time to time, though no one had ever brought wind chimes before. But now with 2 different chimes, that didn't make as much sense. I wasn't too sketched out yet, so I made the decision to keep following the trail out of sheer curiosity. Eventually the sound of the first chime got softer, meaning I was heading away from it. I started walking back to see if I could see where the person had put it. I looked all around, but couldn't see anything. The woods at this point were a bit more dense, so it was hard to see further away from the trail. I decided to walk into the forest a little bit, and then the sound was coming from right above me. I looked up, and I was surprised to see a little metal wind chime hanging about 15 feet up in the tree. I wasn't sure exactly what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. I started to think that maybe it was just someone playing some kind of prank. I also thought about geocaching, which is where people use GPSs to locate secret boxes in natural areas. I had never gone geocaching myself, and I didn't know that much about it. In any case, I walked back onto the trail, deciding what I should do. Eventually, I began walking further into the forest, towards the sound of the second wind chime. However, just as it seemed like I'd be coming right up to it, the trail abruptly ended. I stopped in my tracks, again confused. I looked around to see if I was missing something, maybe a sign or a flag, but I couldn't find anything. I backtracked for a moment and looked around again, but there didn't seem to be any other trails leading off of this one. At that point, I was pretty sure this was a prank, designed to draw random hikers into the woods to a dead end and force them to turn around and go back. Maybe there was even a camera somewhere, and this would end up on YouTube. Unfortunately, that theory went out the window when I started to hear talking coming from somewhere beyond the trail. I could distinctly make out the words, "Shh, one of them's coming," and "Get ready." Immediately, I didn't like the sound of that, as it seemed whoever said it wasn't some teenager, but rather a much older man. I fought the reflex to call out, "Who's there?" And in hindsight, that almost certainly saved my life. Instead, I started walking back slowly and quietly, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. However, nothing could prepare me for the sheer horror of what was about to happen. After 15 seconds of walking, I looked back to see 2 large men in black hoodies standing in the middle of the trail about 50 feet behind me. Both of them were holding large knives, but thank God they were looking in the other direction. They must have been trying to flank me, thinking I would still be at the end of the trail. I froze as my life flashed before my eyes, contemplating what I should do. It didn't really matter though, since one of the men turned around a second later and shouted to the other one to get me. I ran, and so did they. I figured it was somewhere around 1.5 miles back to my car, and I wasn't sure I could outrun them. A moment later, I confirmed my suspicion when I turned around and saw the men were gaining on me, Without thinking, I darted off the trail and into the woods. I didn't really feel the underbrush scraping against me as I ran for my life. I tried going in kind of a zigzag pattern, and it worked, as their footsteps started sounding further away. I kept running for a good 5 minutes or so, before leaning against a tree and catching my breath. My heart was racing, and my veins felt ice cold. After that I kept moving, and then pulled out my phone to find out where I was. Apparently I was almost out of the wooded area, and it looked like there was a small shopping center in another half-mile. The underbrush wasn't as thick here, and so I could move more quickly while making less sound. I think I got there about 10 minutes later, and then I walked inside a convenience store. The cashier freaked out initially, since I apparently looked pretty beat up, with lots of small cuts on my skin and clothing. I was just glad I was safe, and after catching my breath and explaining the situation, she called 911 and I waited with her in the store. Police showed up soon after that and took a statement. I told them as much as I remembered, and eventually I rode with them back to where I parked my car. It didn't look like anyone had tampered with it, and I got inside and started it up. The cops escorted me back to my house, and advised I stay inside with the doors locked. They also told me they'd patrol my area periodically throughout the night. I assume they also swept the trails looking for those 2 men and whoever else may have been with them, but I never got more of the story. Given the horrific nature of what happened, I never went back to that particular park. There were other parks a few minutes further away, which made me feel a lot safer. I also only go to those parks when there's a good chance other people will be around. Part of what added to the terror of my experience was the fact that the trails were deserted, meaning no one would hear me scream and get help. I still freak out whenever I hear a wind chime, so I tend to avoid the garden sections of bigger stores. Ultimately, I'm just glad I escaped with my life, because who knows what those 2 men were about to do to me. Story 3. I'm sad to admit that when me and my friends were in high school, we were degenerate clout chasers. We made a YouTube channel where we'd upload pranks, which were usually nothing more than us just messing with random strangers in public. Unfortunately, this was already after everyone and their dogs started making these types of videos, so our channel never really got that big. I think we only got up to like 2K subs. Anyway, one time we decided to film one of those 24 hours in a store challenge videos. But as many people already know by now, the vast majority of those things aren't real. Ours wasn't real either. Instead, one of my friends, Joey, had a brother who was the manager of a local store. I don't want to say exactly which store it was, just on the off chance that would lead to any trouble. My other friends were Mike and Bruno, and we had all asked Joey's brother if we could film the video at his store. Joey's brother, who I'll call Mark for the story, reluctantly agreed, on the condition that we only film for a short period of time after the store closed for the night, and that we don't damage any of the merchandise. Cut to one Friday night, and Joey, Mike, Bruno, and I showed up around 10. We had our phones as well as a video recorder Joey had borrowed from his parents, though I'm not sure if he actually asked them. We met Mark at the front doors, and he let us in. The lights were still on, and there were 1 or 2 employees finishing up. So when we started recording, we pretended that they were customers, and we were trying to not be noticed. We got a couple action shots of us messing around with the displays in various parts of the store, and Bruno opened one of the juice cartons and started chugging it before putting it back. Full disclosure, we did pay for the carton. After that, we decided to set up our fort in the toilet paper and paper towel section, which we did for about 20 minutes. We asked Mark if he could walk by a couple times and pretend to almost find us, but he didn't want to. So instead, we took turns walking on the outside of the fort, with the rest of us pretending to be afraid of getting caught. Sometime after that, Bruno got the idea to use some of the box fans, which happened to be nearby, to set up kind of a wind tunnel thing throughout the fort. We all liked the idea, as we thought it could help set our video apart. Bruno and I started opening up some of the boxes and getting the fans out, while Joey and Mike went to get some extension cords. A minute later, Mark came by, looking somewhat upset. Joey tried to convince him that we'd put everything back exactly where it was, and I think Mark said something like, "You better or you're paying for it," and walked away. 5 minutes later, and we had 3 fans set up at one end of our fort, and 2 more at the other end. We turned them all on, and in addition to the noise, there was a strong wind running throughout our fort. We started laughing and congratulating ourselves, all the while filming our mischief. By that time it was around 11:30, and Mark told us that we need to leave soon, so we had to start packing up. Happy with the footage we took, Bruno and I carried the fans back to the boxes to put them away, while Joey went to put the extension cords back where he found them. Mike just sat there watching some of the videos he took on his phone. After we finished putting the fans away, Bruno and I came back to the fort so we could start putting the packs of toilet paper and paper towels back where they belonged. Apparently Joey was already back, but he was messing with us as he was further back into the walls of toilet paper. We figured he was trying to scare us, so Bruno and I started to sneak around and try to flank him while Mike recorded us. However, seconds later, Mike started waving his hands to get our attention. Without making a sound, he motioned for us to come back. We figured this was going to be part of the prank, so we started crouch walking back. Then we saw Joey sitting with Mike, and were confused. We turned back to see the person making their way deeper into the toilet paper area. We freaked out a bit when it sank in that person wasn't Joey, but a moment later we agreed it had to be Mark messing with us. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case either, as Mark then walked up to check on us. Apparently whoever that was had been there for a while, and probably used the sound of the fans to push his way through the rolls of toilet paper. Joey started quietly explaining to his brother that there was someone else hiding in the toilet paper area that wasn't with us. Mark, thinking this was part of our prank, started to get visibly upset. He yelled at Joey for us to put things back the way they were, now, and to leave the store. No sooner had Mark said that than whoever was hiding in the toilet paper popped out and started running down the aisle that was at a right angle to ours. He looked like a grown man and was dressed in all black. Mark yelled and ran after him, and we all ran after him too. The man ran into one of the employees only areas before running out of the back door. Long story short, we didn't catch him, but now Mark was probably in pretty big trouble. Even though he was the store manager, he obviously wasn't supposed to allow non-employees to come in after hours to film prank videos. But because the man apparently broke into the store, the footage from the surveillance cameras would have to be replayed. After the guy ran out of the back door, Mark just stood there silent for a while, and we all felt pretty guilty. Eventually Mark went to the door, locked it, and then turned around and told us calmly we needed to go. He escorted us back to the front doors and let us out through there. As we walked outside, Joey went back to talk to Mark for a bit, and then came back to us. We all got into Joey's car and he dropped us off. The next day Joey told us that someone had apparently forgotten to lock that back door, which was likely how the man got into the store, and that nothing appeared to have been stolen. I don't know what happened to Mark, but I think he eventually got promoted, so at least there's that. We decided not to upload any of the video we took, and we stopped making prank videos soon after that. We've since gone off to college, but I still think of that experience from time to time. I have no idea what that guy's deal was. Like, if he was trying to steal stuff, why did he try to hide in the toilet paper area instead of simply walking back out? My main theory is that he was homeless and had some kind of mental condition, so after wandering inside the store and seeing us playing jokes in that area, he was trying to join us. In any case, it was a very bizarre experience. Story 4. I have one daughter who's in college now, and though it's kind of sad to think about them, I wouldn't trade my memories of her childhood for the world. There is one that stands out though, as downright terrifying. Right after my wife and I got married, we moved into a very modest house in a relatively good neighborhood. Part of the reason we chose that specific location is that we saw several parents going for walks with their young children, and there was also an elementary school nearby. Fast forward a few years to when my daughter was 2. She and I were walking over to the school from our house. Though we weren't yet associated with the school, local neighborhood kids and families would frequently use the playgrounds and fields, which were readily accessible. This particular day was rather windy and a bit cold, so I figured we'd only spend a few minutes on the playgrounds before heading back. However, my daughter was having a blast and would burst out laughing whenever a gust of wind hit her. As we neared the school, we heard the ropes banging against the flagpoles at the front of the building. There was a small retention pond area that was empty, and like we usually did, we ran up and down the side a few times and then chased each other around the bottom. I can't remember exactly when I noticed it, but at some point, the sound from the flagpole stopped. Instinctively, I thought someone was there, taking down the flags, and I jumped back up the side of the pond area to see. but instead of seeing someone taking the flags down, I saw what appeared to be a person hugging the two flagpoles, preventing the ropes from banging back and forth. I squinted as I tried to figure out what I was looking at. The person was wearing a dark blue hoodie and blue jeans, both of which were rather dirty. They were facing away from me, so I couldn't see their face. Something about them also just looked off. The person looked too small to be an adult, but too big to be a kid, and their build didn't look like it belonged to a teenager either. My daughter was laughing and looking up at me from the bottom of the pond area, so I smiled and went back down and picked her up. Not knowing who that person was by the flagpoles, I decided it would be best to go, but as we got back up to the surface level, I noticed that whoever was there was now gone, and the ropes were hitting the flagpoles again. This struck me as strange, primarily because that person had only been out of my field of view for a few seconds, and there weren't any places to hide nearby. It began to seem so bizarre that I questioned whether or not I had imagined it. As we slowly walked back, my daughter threw a temper tantrum, meaning that she really wanted to go to the park. I thought things over for a moment, then decided to turn around and actually go there. We walked a little bit around the front of the building, through one of the side parking lots, and then finally onto the playground designed for little kids. There was a small playscape with a few slides and one of those tic-tac-toe boards, as well as swings and a few other items. While continuing to supervise my daughter, I'd periodically glance around, not really expecting that figure to show up again, but I was just being cautious. Eventually, when I saw she was starting to get tired, I picked her up and we started walking back. As we were about to round the corner back to the front of the building, I stopped and looked around again. I didn't see anything, but then I realized I didn't hear the ropes hitting the flagpoles. The wind was still gusting as before, so somehow I knew that person had come back and was grabbing onto the flagpoles for whatever reason. I waited for like 5 seconds, thinking things over, but eventually I heard the ropes again, and like before I questioned if I wasn't hearing or seeing things. I walked forward again, and when the flagpoles came into view, there was indeed no one there. I breathed a sigh of relief, but nothing could prepare me for the horror of the next 30 seconds. No sooner had we started walking by the front of the school than I started hearing what sounded like claws scraping against the concrete. Then, 20 feet ahead of us, I saw something crawling out of the large drain on the side of the road leading to the front of the building. It was that person, and they were moving fast. I didn't get the best look at them, and the hoodie was drawn closely around their face, but their eyes did look insane. I held my daughter tighter than ever before and took off running in the other direction. To my shock, they started chasing after me. I screamed at them to back off as my daughter started crying. I'm not sure if it was my screaming or seeing another family walking towards us, but that person stopped and started running back behind the school. The family immediately walked over to us and asked if we were okay. I explained what happened, and I ended up calling the cops and reporting the man, or woman, I wasn't really sure. I'll spare some of the details, but the cops came over and did a sweep of the school and didn't find that person. This happened on a Saturday, and the next week when I drove by the school on my way to work, I noticed a cop car was parked in that front parking lot. As far as I know, they never apprehended that man, and I didn't take my daughter back there for several months. Not that my wife would have let me anyway. Though our daughter no longer lives with us, my wife and I still live in our same house. Nothing even remotely like that has ever happened again, and perhaps that's why it sticks out in my mind so much. There were so many questions, including who that person was, what they were doing there, and what they were planning to do to me and my daughter. Based on their physical characteristics, I still couldn't tell what gender they were, but I think they had some kind of medical condition. In any case, I'm just glad that things didn't get physical.